It is. I now call to order the stationary task force meeting on November 20th, 2025 at 6:03 PM. First order of business is roll call. Let staff please call the roll.
Member Garg notified staff she will not be in attendance. Member Collins,
Present.
Member Evans,
Present.
Member Scher,
Here.
Member Huff. Here. Member Huynh,
Here.
Member Mayer, Member Ondrasek,
Here.
Member Plain,
Here.
Member Stockwell.
Here.
Oh, and I am here. Is there a motion to excuse Member Garg? And Member Mayor just informed me he's got a family thing he needs to attend to, and he can't make it as well. Do I have a motion to excuse Member Garg and Member Mayor?
Move to.
Dan, a second, Sean. Those who are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstain? Unanimous, 2 absence. Motion passes. Next item is a declaration of SATF procedures. Staff, please read the SATF meeting procedures into a record. Thank you.
Meetings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the SATF directs all activity during the meeting. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent meeting. Special procedures or time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. Copies of the current agenda and any staff reports for each item on the agenda are available online on the station area website as well as on the city clerk's website.
Thank you. We now move to the consent calendar. Staff?
The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted or approved by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. We have 2 items on the consent calendar this evening. The first are the minutes from the August 21st meeting, which were continued at our last meeting, and then the September 18th meeting minutes as well.
Thank you. This would be a motion item. If you were not at the meeting, such as myself, I will abstain from this vote. So you do have the option of doing that. I have no visibility on like who were in those meetings. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Move that we approve the consent calendar.
Do you remember, Hein, do you have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Those who are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Opposed? And abstain, that's me. Oh, okay, so there's 2 abstention.
I'll abstain. Member Huff.
Okay, so 3 abstain. Can't count tonight, 1, 2. There's 6 ayes. Motion passes. Thank you. Next section, we have public presentations and comments. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address the task force on items that are not on the agenda tonight? There are no members of the public sitting and present with us. Are there members in online that would like to speak?
Seeing none, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on, and we'll move to general business. And I'm gonna throw it over to staff.
Thank you. Just give me one moment. Thank you, Chair. So our first item on the public general business calendar, I should say, is a brief presentation on SB 79. So State Bill 79 was recently passed by this, or recently signed into law by the governor as of October 10th, I believe, or was, yes, October 10th. So we are still getting our hands around it, but I wanted to give you a brief presentation on some of the implications of State Bill 79 as we understand it today, knowing that our attorneys are still evaluating it as well for its implications on our work here. So the intent of the bill is to increase the supply of affordable housing, specifically around train stations or other transportation facilities. And so it's being really strategic with where it's allowing for this greater residential density. So the intention of this bill is to improve housing affordability and then have environmental benefits as well, whether reducing greenhouse gases or an increasing transportation efficiency. So key provisions as part of this bill are the mandatory upzoning near transit, requiring local governments to upzone land near rail stations and rapid bus corridors. And then it's also designed to incentivize higher density mixed-use development within those walkable distances to transit. So here on this slide, you see the station area, so our plan area with two radii, one a quarter mile and one a half mile. And so the bill we'll see on the next slide has specific requirements that the city has to implement within a quarter mile of a transit station and then a half a mile of a transit station. So the requirements are based on the type of transit provided at the station. And so this is mostly going to affect within the state, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and then potentially some in the Sacramento area as well. So you have to be a fairly large transit station for this to impact you. So on this slide, you see the requirement for the distance from the transit stop and the maximum, or I should say minimum height that would be required based on proximity to the station. They're also implementing minimum residential densities within those radii and then required floor area ratios as well. So for example, if sites are directly adjacent to a station, the minimum height requirement would be 95 feet. Residential density would be up to 160 dwelling units to the acre if they utilized a bonus, and then the residential FAR would be up to 4.5. So our inclusionary housing requirements would still be applicable to units more than 10 units, which is standard now as well. And then the greater of any local requirement or one of the following. So there's different tiers depending on the income level that the bill requires. Separately from that, it doesn't modify the CEQA requirements. A project would still be required to go through our standard CEQA process. It doesn't establish any new ministerial approval processes. However, projects qualifying under SB 35 or SB 423 could use the exemptions that are outlined in those bills. And then I also wanted to point out, we got a little update from MTC ABAG. So as part of the bill, they are required to develop maps identifying the qualifying transit-oriented development stops and zones by tier within their jurisdiction in the Bay Area. So they are still working on that. They said the timing of this mapping effort is yet to be determined, as it is unclear if or when HCD will publish guidance to inform this effort. So we do, and hopefully anticipate some maps that'll help us kind of identify the requirements on our transit station. And then lastly, so the bill does allow for a city to develop an alternative plan, so a TOD alternate plan, which we believe the station area plan that we are currently developing would qualify as such. So basically so So SB 79 wouldn't apply. We would have our specific plan in place. But however, there are some requirements or stipulations related to that. So we have to be able to maintain the net zoned capacity. So the net zone capacity as identified in SB 79, we need to maintain that as part of our specific plan. We cannot reduce the maximum allowed density. Exceptions may not exceed 10%. So any of our exceptions areas cannot exceed 10%. And then we cannot exceed 200% of the maximum density prescribed. And then it excludes capacity calculations on any exempted sites. The other interesting bit that we are still exploring is that the bill outlines a 120-day HCD review for any alternate plan that a city develops, that they would review it and confirm that it is an alternative to the requirements of SB 79. We're still unclear on whether that would occur, the timing of that. So I'm assuming it would occur prior to our council adoption, but we're still working on the timing of that, and we'll have to build that into our project schedule. And WRT is aware of that as well. So that concludes our presentation. Like I said, we're still getting our arms around it to understand all the implications, but that's kind of a basic outline of our understanding at this point.
Is there a implementation date or an effective date?
Oh, sorry, I think it was on my earlier slide, but I didn't say it. It's effective July 1st of next year, so July 1st, 2026. So technically would be in effect before our specific plan is adopted.
Do you mind going back to that last slide you were on the alternate plan? So the net zone capacity is basically like if we were to calculate like how much density we need to have for that area, we can kind of move that around to make sure, okay. Since the VTA site is actually not part of our plan, like with that, kind of excluding that, actually, I'm trying to phrase it. Would that area have to be calculated in with the zone capacity?
Are you referring to the BART parking lot?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the whole project with the.
Yeah, the park is within the plan area, but the parking lot, like you're saying, is not. And so our intent at our study session with council on December 16th is not only to inform them on, provide them an update on the project, but also we're going to ask them to take action on incorporating that land into our plan area.
Okay.
And that kind of rolls into.
Yeah, that and also the BART station. I was thinking about and also the tracks and all that stuff, because that's within the radius of the station, right? I mean, within the area. I'm trying to figure out like how the calculations would work.
Yeah. Are you asking like, does the actual tracks on the station count as the area? So we have to have density for that. Does that count? I have the same question.
Because it's taking a lot of room.
Because it's taking a lot of room. So like, it may give us like big calculation of you need this much housing because of this space, but it's actually part of the transit. So I guess that's how is that calculated?
My math, or like.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of too. I heard what you said. I'm like, oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
Okay.
We'll take it down.
Thank you. I mean, that's something for the lawyers to clarify. Yeah.
Question. So does that include all the parcels that may not be zoned? Basically, that is the calculation.
I believe so, yes, because it's requiring upzoning and we have to maintain it, the overall density within those radii.
And then just so I'm clear, the lowest density in that radius was 100 units per acre.
In that second, between a quarter mile and a half mile,
Yeah.
it has it at 100, yes.
And the minimum within the quarter mile is 120 units per acre.
Do you know, since I would sure to guess that half-mile radius leads into San Jose, that the city of San Jose would have to recognize it?
They would have to recognize this unless they were to adopt their own alternative plan.
So I want to ask a question. Does the San Jose area count toward our plan, or is it just the area that's in the city of Santa Clara that would count toward the amount of housing in the area?
I also noticed that when you're looking at the two radii, the bigger one leads into the runways of the airport as well. That shrinks the areas that we can work with.
It's a good question. I guess we're not, does the airport count?
I don't know if this was already asked because I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing some of the folks at the other side there, but those ratios that you presented on, I believe the last slide of this, should I be reading that as per total acre or per developable acre?
Yeah, that's the question I think that you didn't hear, whether like the station itself would count toward the density or if we're just looking at developable land. So that's a question we'll circle back with the attorneys.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I might want to also think about further refining the question to even outside of something like a track, if it's land, but in a different not developable category. I'm assuming based on most other plans of this kind that we adhere to, we typically think about developable acres rather than raw acres, but this that has no bearing on this, obviously. So it would be good to know that.
One other question about the FAR on this slide. It seems like it's capped at a certain amount, but we're also pushing density. They kind of work, seems like they work against each other. You may need more FAR to build 120 units per acre.
It's the other thing was like, I think we're gonna push up against the height maximum next to the airport. On that too.
Also, to the noise implications from the airport and how far you can go towards the airport with residential development impact. Being able to build where there's too much noise.
A really unique site.
I also had a question. I saw you had a note about there's like 200% in one area. What does that mean by one site can't have more than 200%? And what counts as a site? Like, a lot of our density right now is like the Coleman, the Gateway project. Is that a single site? Does that count as, not that's necessarily 200%, but.
That's a good question as well. I'll have to see if they defined site. Yeah, maybe just project.
Yeah, I pulled the text of the bill up. They don't define site that I could see, so explicitly.
Yeah, the second bullet's also interesting too, because it talks about exceptions and like historical resources like exception. And it may not exceed 10% of, I assume, developable land. So it would be kind of interesting to see like how our historical resources would butt up against this as well. Yeah, the second and third bullet seems to be like opposing constraints.
So I had another question. I recall that there was some text, and I don't know what it was, in the bill about historic resources and like that future historic resource designations don't apply to some of the limitations. Because I remember they had a date about like, as of January 1st, 2025, there was some exception. I don't know exactly the details, but I know the California Preservation, they sent something out about it because it actually guts a lot of the future designations of the historic districts, like they aren't protected anymore, it sounded like. I would like to understand a little bit about that. Not that, I don't know if there's anything else with designate historic and by the station, but there are certainly things that are predate.
And no, this is not like related to us, but like out of curiosity, like are there any other sites in the city that would be designated this way, like by this bill? Just kind of curious, with like Lawrence Station or something like that would be.
Yeah, so Lawrence Station, Tasman, East Pacific Plan area would all fall within this.
Okay.
And I think actually possibly even El Camino Real,
Really?
yeah,
Oh,
with the bus with headways.
the entire corridor.
Would that be all the way up and all the way down Alameda where the 522 runs, basically?
Possibly. It's just another thing. We need the maps.
Oh, okay,
We're guessing.
gotcha. Makes sense though. Okay.
I'm Rob Swerk from BTA. Just
Hey.
apologies for being here a few minutes late. On the last question, I won't say for certain, but our understanding so far from what we've heard is that the only stations along the 522 route where SB 79 would apply is the two in San Jose where there's dedicated bus lanes, because there's a section of 79 that says, basically the definition of bus rapid transit, take the first provision of this other state law that references bus rapid transit, and that's dedicated lanes and service at 15-minute intervals or better. So it would we believe it would just be those two stations in like Alamarac Avenue east of downtown San Jose. But it's probably still best to, have city attorneys confirm that, and
Verified.
perhaps HCD.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other clarifying questions or we want to forward? I know we have a lot.
And just to reiterate, at council, not on December 16th, not only will we be doing the study session, we'll also be asking them to expand the boundary of our plan.
Okay.
Keeping SB 79 in mind. So to include the gray area you see here, which is currently designated as the BART at-grade parking lot. Yeah, essentially.
And then also a couple of the blocks at Lafayette there, right next to the yellow area, that if we included those blocks that are in the gray, that would add protection to those blocks because we'd be able to transfer the density from them to the rest of the station area. So there's some smaller historic or potentially historic homes, right, that would be protected from redevelopment under this law if we included them in the boundary area.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question is, should we consider expanding to everything within this circle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So if we do get the approval to expand the area, how does that affect the work that we've already done already?
I don't think it does because our intent, well, other than the BART station, but our intent with including these gray parcels is to protect them from redevelopment. So we would keep their land use the same and push the required density from these to some other parcels.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be like curious, like with the work we've done with the density we've already discussed, like if that was going to cover what is being required, because we're shifting the density around with with all those parcels being included. It'd be interesting to see the calculation and if there's any adjustments that we need to make.
Yes, WRT is taking a look at that, and luckily we have not started our CEQA process yet. So we still have room for adjustments there.
Cool.
I assume you also look at it, but I'll also ask like the Santa Clara University count is exempt or not? Yeah, you should. And would residence halls count as housing as well? That's an interesting question. So do they meet housing by having housing on campus and similarly, like, does their land count toward it, or is it somehow handled differently because it's a different entity?
Technically, housing.
Is that study session scheduled for December 16th public meeting or?
Yes, it's during the city council's regular meeting. I'm not sure where we'll be on the agenda yet, but it'll be, yes, during the public hearing.
Thank you.
Let's see if there's any public comment.
Maybe I'll just do my quick planning commission study session recap, and then in case people have public comment on that.
Okay. Please do.
This will be super brief as well, but we had our first study session with the planning commission on October 8th. And kind of went over the work of, obviously all the work we've done so far and our preferred land use plan to get some feedback from them in advance of going to council. So a lot of the discussion was about, a lot of the discussion was about if redevelopment around the airport, how it may affect airport operations. And then conversely, how the location of the airport may constrain future development, given density or height restrictions, and then other things you were mentioning earlier, like noise, et cetera. There was a lot of discussion about traffic circulation challenges and existing congestion issues along Coleman and how we were going to analyze that as part of the traffic analysis. And then discussion about the station plaza specific to the optimal size and configuration of it, how it would really function, and what we can do to program it to make sure it's used how we want it to be used. So that was, we'll add this slide to the city council study session so they're aware of the discussion that took place as well. And the meeting's available online if anyone's interested.
Thank you for that. Any questions from the task force about the study session with planning? If not, I would open it up to public. Okay, I'm gonna open it to public comments. We don't have any members of the public in chamber. If you're online and you would like to comment or kind of add to some of our clarifying questions, please raise your hand. Seeing none, actually. So I think we can move on to the next item.
So we have VTA staff here this evening, again, to help us kind of go over the work they've been doing on that BART parking lot that we've been discussing. So this really came about based on comments that you all made at previous meetings about the BART parking lot and how SB 79 may affect future development of that. Those comments were echoed at Planning Commission. And so VTA has again partnered with Site Lab to do some schemes for the BART parking lot for future development of that. And we will be incorporating that into our City Council study session presentation as well. So I will turn it over to Rob, and then we have Lindsay Kiner online and Ugo from Site Lab.
Thank you and welcome back.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you so much for some time this evening. And as Rebecca mentioned, I'm joined remotely this evening by Lindsay Kiner, who's with VTA's Transit-Oriented Communities program. So if there's any questions kind of in the bigger picture about VTA's transit-oriented communities or our approach to transit-oriented development, Lindsay could help jump in. And then we have Ugo from Site Lab, who you'll recall actually helped give a presentation a couple of meetings ago, talking about potential development on the Caltrain parking lot, the current Caltrain parking lot side of the tracks. So Ugo will talk a little bit about now the BART station side of the tracks. So just starting out, kind of building on what Rebecca said, over the last few months, you're probably aware that the VTA BART program has been working to advance the plans for the phase 2 extension, including looking at potential cost savings. And as part of that, we've looked at refinements to the configuration of New Hall Yard in conjunction with BART, the BART agency, which we partner with very closely in the development of this extension. And as a result of looking at the potential, some reconfiguration of New Hall Yard, we have identified the possibility of having the BART parking on the BART station side of the tracks, no longer needing to be provided in a structure, but rather being able to be provided in a surface parking configuration at the initial opening of the extension. Knowing that the city and VTA, and even it's been discussed, the interest at the task force level as well, the interest in could there be some potential for transit-oriented development on the BART station side of the tracks, on that footprint. We've looked at just conceptually, working with Site Lab, we've looked at the possibilities of essentially kind of a fit test, what could potentially fit on those parcels, incorporating future BART patron parking into the development. So the idea would be at opening, the parking for the BART patrons would be provided as a surface lot. And then over time, when the development climate is right and there's an opportunity to, then you could see development that would both provide parking for the development uses themselves, as well as BART patron parking incorporated, basically vertically in. So with that, I will turn it over to Ugo, who I think is, Ugo, you'll share your slides, right? And if you could also just briefly, again, introduce yourself to the group and take it away.
Yes, thank you, Rob. I hope you can hear me okay. Yes, okay. It's good to be back. It's been a while since our last, that I joined the last meeting, but happy to be here. As Rob said, we have developed some very conceptual sketches to understand the development potential of these sites and their, the vision of SB 79 and the TOD development. So let me share my screen very quickly to go over this. Okay, I hope you're seeing this.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we're looking at an area that it's identified here in this slide as the parking lot for the BART station. We have already sort of like mapped a little bit what are the design drivers and the constraints of the site. The area that you see here is something about 2.5 to 3 acres, depending where we'd really limit this, which is it will require some sort of like further study. But within this area, we see the potential of allocating transit-oriented development. We are sort of responding to sidelines and also access lines to the site from potential future development, like the Hunters Point development on this side. Please note the north arrow is pointing to the bottom of the screen. and also the pedestrian movement around the station into the underground connection to the other side of the tracks. Within this, there's also constraints in terms of BART operations. There are certain points that we need to keep parking for BART operators and the possibility of access and transverse the site. With these constraints, we looked at mostly two scenarios that present sort of like a different approach to mostly the building that is right next to the station. There is one scenario where we are looking at residential development with a commercial component right next to the station, shown here in blue as office. And a second scenario where we flip, basically the rest remains the same, but we flip that to residential to understand what the site is giving us in terms of residences and units next to the station. We are looking at around 800,000 or 780,000 square feet of development, providing a different number of units, but similar number of parking, which is at this point assumed at a podium level and potentially one underground level under the two blocks closest to the station. If we go a little bit more into detail through each of them, this is kind of like, again, conceptual study of how this could be distributed and allocated within the site. You can see here the office building next to the drop-off and plaza area and access to the station. We see also an idea of continuing the already proposed kind of like a green linear park that takes you into the neighborhood park on the other side of at the bottom of the screen, with some activation written on the ground floor, mimicking that on the other side, bringing in sort of like a more active edge to Champions Way and creating kind of like a transition space for the future development, thinking that in the future, if there's ever a potential elevated connection through the tracks into the other side where the historic station is, that could happen along these lines. Otherwise, we have some sort of like activating program at the ground level, sort of like continuing the idea from the Hunters Partners development on the other side and bringing a little bit of activity, taking you down back into the plaza for BART. We're looking at the height limitations within the plan. We're saying that there's a potential of residential, a little bit taller building capped at 13 floors, given the 148 feet limitation that we saw previously in the presentation. Office, because you have a larger distance between floor to ceiling, you get around maybe 9 to 10 floors, and the rest would be 7-floor residential buildings over podium, most likely to accommodate parking with a liner of residential or commercial outside towards the street to create, a more pleasant environment along Champions Way. This is kind of like the concept yields we're getting from this exercise. We're talking about an estimated, again, as I showed at the beginning, comparing both schemes. In this case, above 800,000 square foot of development that yields about 425 new residential units and around 200K of office space. This gives us also a total of 720 parking spaces that are distributed. It considers some parking spaces left on the surface for maybe exclusive BART operations, and some other parking within podiums and the potential spaces that could be accommodated in one level underground below these 2 blocks next to the station. Moving on to the second scenario, we simply flip this one building to residential, and we align again another residential tower of 13 floors at this point, sort of like along, again, the green linear connection. The rest remains basically the same. So in this scheme, we have now slightly less square footage just because of the floor plates of the building, yielding now more residential units at 585 approximately because of the swap of this one building, same number of parkings considering and under the same considerations basically. So to summarize, we see that scenario 1 is adding about 450 units to the already proposed 5,500 under the stationary specific plan to get an uplift of, very close to the 6,000 units and a little bit more added to the office or commercial space. Whereas the second scenario, you get slightly more units. Again, the uplift brings you closer to the 6,000 new units without changes to the gross floor area for commercial or office space. Again, these are concepts. We kind of like studied a little bit what could happen here, keeping in mind the surrounding buildings that we see from the exercise that the city and WRT are currently developing. We are staying within the height limitation. We're mimicking a little bit the massing and arrangement of the buildings surrounding this area, but it does not indicate, specific form or shape whatsoever. This would have to be further studied and then defined together with the development of the plan.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much, Hugo. And I think at this point, we'd certainly just welcome the task force's questions and, initial feedback here. And also, if city staff would like to jump in here at all or just like to open it up.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Open it up for the task force.
Well, won't the additional development create the need for even, excuse me, even more parking?
Hugo, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can reply. You can add, Rob. There is the consideration of some extra parking on it. We are considering the need for BART patrons parking requirement, and we are also considering parking for the development at a lower ratio. We calculated around 0.5 parking area ratio per unit, which is lower because of, we're assuming, encouraging ridership. Maybe that could be a little bit lower. And it may require, depending on how we do this with the one level underground or not, it may require some joint use of the parking facility to be determined. And I see Lindsay has a hand up.
How do you know how much is enough? I mean, my experience with BART is that parking, I don't ride BART frequently, but parking seems to be a really big problem at a lot of the stations. And this is like an end of the line station too. So people could be coming from, I don't know, Gilroy or something to the station, right?
Oh, yeah. And I don't know if it's a more specific number. We based it on the number that was given to us at 500. I don't know if that will be restudied or changed. I don't know if someone has some input on that.
Yeah, so the number that Hugo mentioned, two responses to that. That comes from the environmental clearance documents for the BART station itself. So BART is, legally required to build at least that many parking spaces. Like Hugo mentioned, one of the benefits of transit stations and the parking for them, if it is shared use or joint use, there could be temporal differences, right? So residents often leave during the day for work, for school, and that often frees up spaces that could be used by transit commuters. So there's lots of examples of this. I know a lot of people are doing hybrid work schedules, but based off the land uses in the development around there, people need those parking spots at different times of day. So there could be some shared uses there, and there's good examples from other BART stations too. So, and typically when we are doing developments, we always do a parking study. So to figure out with that development, what is the demand? There are shared parking models. The most commonly used one is by the Urban Lands Institute. And so we would look at that carefully. Good question. I think we're using just the CEQA number of around 500 right now, just to start with, because that's legally what they need to, that needs to be provided for this station, if that makes sense.
I have a few questions. I guess the first thing I wanted to say is, I thank you for putting this plan together. I've been trying to convince BTA to put some plan like this together for at least 5 or 6 years through the community working group. So I'm glad to see that this is at least being considered now. I have a couple questions about the plan, but also just a question about maybe what's changed, because I know earlier I had heard a lot of feedback that this couldn't be done for reasons because like there was a requirement of the station to have the yard. BART, for example, wouldn't allow it. You know, I for better or worse, I heard excuses for, probably the last 6 or 7, 6 years, pre-pandemic even. So I appreciate that we have this, but I'm trying to understand, like, is this a realistic, thing? Like, we could approve it and it'd be great. I mean, I really like what I'm seeing, right? This is like kind of like a good use of the space, but I just want to understand a little bit about, do we think BART is okay with this? Could we get sign off?
Maybe I can start, and perhaps Lindsay, if you have further thoughts, feel free to jump in. My understanding, and we could certainly, before working with city staff to incorporate anything like this into the project definition, for instance, for the CEQA for this station area plan, we could go back and just verify. But my understanding is that this last, let's say, 6-month period of, having to go back and do, value engineering and look at for cost efficiency in the BART phase 2 project has led to some really tough discussions about exactly what's needed at Newhall Yard and close coordination with BART on that. So, our BART program staff were closely involved when we were putting this together, and they have, confirmed that this should be available, but we can certainly make sure before this would actually get included into the, the station area plan.
I mean, absolutely fair. I would love to include it, whether or not BART wants it, to tell them like what the community wants. But I just wanted to check with that because I think also some articles that BART was belly feeling that they were being forced into this parking lot and but from my perspective in the Santa Clara community, I don't want the yard. I mean, we need one for practical persons. I'd love to see the housing here, right? I think that's a much better use of the land. And, I haven't had a way to really convey that to BART. So, certainly I'm not saying we shouldn't do it on our side. I think this is good for the city. It's more that I just want to make sure that, we're not ruffling that there's a chance this will happen. So I did have a couple of questions about the plan as well. You mentioned the time use. I had heard the same thing. I noticed the commercial design versus residential. Do we find that we get better sharing with the commercial plan for day? Because like I could imagine a lot of residents always feel like they have their parking spot, and versus commercial, usually it's you just come in for the day, right? And I'm curious about which of these options might actually allow for more BART parking, right? Because to the point, we have to meet a certain amount of parking for the station. There will be some commuters trying to get on there and some just getting off.
Lindsay, do you want to jump in on that a little bit more on the shared parking concept?
Well, I think, sure. And I saw Ugo unmute. So I guess my quick answer is, we would always study this more. There's different ways to do it. I've seen kind of situations where sometimes like there's certain parking, designated for BART for, certain hours or transit. There could be like a blocked off area just for residential parking stacked where, residents would have to tag in and tag out. So I've seen examples of that in Los Angeles. I think there's different possibilities. And that's why for our TOD studies, we always do like an access and parking study to try to really get down to a fine grain what the demand would be temporally. And, given that things change a little bit with hybrid work. So yeah, I hear you, like commercial and like leisure uses, like evening uses can go well with transit, right? So I think it all depends, but we wouldn't quite delve into that detail at this point, but happy to kind of talk about scenarios or concerns. And Ugo, go ahead.
No, I was simply gonna say, I think, Lindsay, that's a great input. I was gonna say in terms of, you know, if we just think of the question, yes, maybe a commercial use, it's easier in that way, but it may provide, because we have less units having the commercial, there's maybe some requirement to provide a parking for the office spaces too. That may not be as stringent, and maybe the number of units. It would make the share maybe slightly a little bit easier if we're just looking at the number. But in terms of the scheme, yeah, I think we're studying this. The market will also help indicate which way to go a little bit in the future. So I think it will depend on that, and I'm sure that some solution can be worked out in the way that Lindsay mentioned in terms of models that we see somewhere else.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I applaud the flexibility. I mean, leave it flexible as well. You know, we have a lot of that in the zoning. I mean, part of me says housing is a big problem right now, and there's already a lot of office space there. So, you know, the housing was probably where I would lean given the choice. But I just recognize that there's different uses.
Yeah.
If it's just open parking, I know, like, if I see the streets in these like apartment complexes, they just feel like residents will park a bunch of cars and they'll just stay there. Whereas, you know, the office workers come in and go. So that's a more fluid use. But I also recognize my employer has a major parking problem right now. And that's become a controversy with our work. Like, you can't find parking at our office. At least this is by transit. So I would hope that that's different. Our office is not like transit adjacent. So yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate this. It's certainly something I really appreciate that VTA took a look at and has come out with. And thank you for hearing the community feedback. So.
Any more comments from the task force? Or questions? I mean, I would tag on that, you know, thank you for the kind of showing this plan that, like, you know, again, I've always also been involved in like trying to get some TOD like in the area, and kind of like harken back to the SB 79 we were just talking about. I think having this is actually going to add to the density requirement that we need for to satisfy those requirements. So I'm like, you know, to include this in our plan would be pretty helpful, I think, to our numbers. So that's great. I guess like one of the question I had was parking requirements. I thought, like, wasn't there something about like the parking requirements a little bit lower for residential if it's right by transit right now? So you were saying there was like a 0.5 per unit. That's in your calculation right now. So like
that's what we use right now. We started with a higher number, but because of yes, being by transit, we kind of like lower that. But Lindsay or Rob, is there any more information on that? Is there a specific number that we could go as low as? I don't know if there's a target for that specifically, or guidelines on how low can we go in terms of parking ratio.
The only thing I would say, and certainly city staff can jump in here, is that probably you're aware that AB 2097, which was passed a couple of years ago, eliminated or made it so that cities cannot have minimum parking requirements in a certain radius of major transit stops for projects that are residential or residential mixed use, right? So it could actually go very low, but it depends what the market will bear, right? And that's why I think both Lindsay and Ugo had pointed out we'd do a study before. You know, it's pretty unrealistic to think that you would put in, just hypothetically, you know, a zero parking project or something like that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So 2097, yeah, correct. Passed in 2022, and I think a lot of folks are trying to grapple like, what does it mean? But it's within 1/2 mile, so this would definitely, you know, be within that catchment area. But yes, it could go quite low, but you do have to be kind of reasonable, and hope that folks are hopefully taking transit. And I will note one of our requirements for our affordable housing units is we do provide smart passes for all residents, I think like over the age of 5, I want to say. So the smart passes for 2 years. So that's to try to incentivize folks who live in our units to take transit, to just lower the barriers, right? So when our first affordable housing comes online, with Tommyan, which actually did just come online, we're putting those passes out, and we might have some data on like usage and stuff. But we don't just kind of put it near transit and hope people use it, right? Like we give them passes. We try to do a lot to incentivize and really lower those barriers, especially for our affordable housing units and the families who live in there. Not just one, just for all the kind of adults, and I forget the age, it's either 5 or 12, I can look it up, years old. So it's a pretty good benefit, I would say. And the developers need to, they have to bear that cost.
Lindsay, I don't know if you wanted to speak just briefly about the slightly larger requirement that we have incorporated with our transit-oriented development policy of developers providing TDM measures in general, that there's that sort of points-based system.
Yes, we do have, if you look up our VTA TOC policy, and I will note, we are updating our TOD toolbox. And so I think with that coming through our board, and Rob probably knows a little bit more about that timeline than I do, we might see some more updates to our transit-oriented communities policy. So we do have, as part of that document, which was last updated, I'm just checking now, I think within, about a year ago, we have a whole section of there about all the TDM measures that the developer needs to provide to residents, including for the affordable housing residents, the smart passes for the first 2 years of occupancy, and there's a whole point system. And so I think this is really great. I can kind of, also, we talk about the parking needs in here. So we're happy to share a copy of this, but if you kind of check out page 14, we talk about how we go about looking at the parking needs, and how when we're evaluating TOD parking needs, we're also taking into account the TDM measures. And TDM essentially stands for transit demand management. So what measures can we use to try to get people out of single occupancy vehicles, right? So kind of using the example of someone who talked about their work being overparked, what could be, in that instance, what could the employer be doing? What kind of programs, incentives could they offer, try to get people to carpool, use other modes, bike, take transit, other aspects to get you to kind of not have to make every trip in your car. So we talk about best practices in here, like shared use parking agreements with neighboring uses, parking districts, which could be like, we talked about sort of these shared use. So if you've got a lot of uses, there's going to be lots of development in this area. Ugo talked about the other, like the Hunter development, and we've got Roku nearby, and there's all other sorts of things happening. And the airport, you could kind of create this district where the parking is shared, and the commercial and the different business owners would like pay into that parking district and be like, these are the parking spaces that we're contributing to this pool. So that's one of the other things. Time limits to promote parking turnover. You can do valet parking for vehicles and bicyclists, preferred parking for high occupancy and clean air vehicles, transit passes, car, bike, scooter share programs. That can also be really popular. There's probably some of that already happening. Amenities for bicyclists, right? So sometimes developers will provide showers, or office buildings will have showers, bike lockers, other mode supportive things to help people make it possible for longer distance rides, real-time on-site mobile device updates for parking availability. So before you even leave and you're going to go to the BART station, figure out if you can't get a parking spot, right? And kind of plan your mode based off of that. Variable parking, paid parking, BART has a long history of that. Like I think folks are probably familiar that depending on which station you go to in BART and the time of day, the price is higher or lower. So there's a lot here. I don't want to like go into too much detail, but there's lots of different TDM options that we give to developers, and there's kind of a point system where they have to meet these. I will point out that the transit pass is not one that's flexible. They have to provide that, and that was an update we made. I think it was November of 2024 because we've kind of been also looking into that. So the points-based system, there's more detail on that on page 22. If folks want me to go into detail, I will. I just want to make sure we have time for other questions, and we can make sure that you guys get a copy of the TOC policy so you can take a look at that. I think it would answer some of the questions about parking too. So I'd encourage folks to take a look at that, and we're happy to kind of delve into that in more detail at another meeting as well. Does that help, Rob?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay. That's very
Sure.
thorough. And I think what I'd just say in general, besides that, definitely we can, we'll work with city staff to make sure that you have the link to the latest and greatest version of that policy. There's also, we have like kind of an online calculator thing that helps a developer who's doing a TOD on BTA land just test out to see like what transportation demand management points they would get for different things. But in general, that message that Lindsay shared very early, which is we would approach this as trying to establish essentially like a mobility hub at the BART station with a development, so that we're not having the TOD developer just put essentially a suburban development next to a major transit station, try and have a lot of different mobility options, which would help manage the parking demand.
Awesome. Thank you for the detailed answers. I mean, to be clear, like I could nerd out on TVM like for hours because I'm involved in Caltrain as well.
Yeah.
So thank you. I really appreciate this, and sending the policy out for us to review to kind of formulate any other questions about the TVM would be amazing. So that would be helpful for us to think through the density as well. Go ahead.
Just broadening the question out a little bit. I think we talked about it before at one of these meetings, but it's been a while, and I wanted to just get back on page that with respect to TDM across the entire station area, I've been imagining that as developments would come online that were consistent with this plan, that each development would prepare, applicants would be preparing TDM plans for each one that the city would review and provide approval for. So the question of right-sizing parking and right-sizing other strategies for integrating transportation into a so-called mobility hub, as Rob just mentioned, will be done in the future on a project-by-project basis. Am I correct in thinking that?
You're correct in thinking that regarding the TDM plans. So yes, individual projects will be responsible for drafting the TDM plan when they come online. But the right sizing parking, that would really be up to the individual developers because as Rob stated, based on that state law, AB 2097, we can't prescribe minimum parking requirements anymore given the proximity to transit.
Yeah, understood. I think what I was implying but didn't really state clearly or outright was just that each development proposal would present an assessment of the needed parking and that's based on their studies and their due diligence of what the area, what parking demand would be generated based on the transportation amenities and the like.
Yes, exactly.
And then the toolkit that, Rob, that you mentioned that VTA has. So I'm a little out of the loop at the moment. Is the TDM toolkit a substantially different thing than the VMT toolkit?
It's a good question. They are somewhat related, but they are distinct in the development projects they would be used for, they would apply to, and some of the types of measures that you could get credit for might differ. Just to orient, in case, for the task force's reference, in case you're not quite as familiar, what Member Huff was referring to is in the follow-up to the state passing Senate Bill 743, the requirement that in CEQA that lead agencies need to focus on reduction of vehicle miles traveled rather than focusing on level of service, auto delay in CEQA analysis. VTA helped make available a VMT evaluation calculator tool, basically this screening tool that's web and GIS mapping based, that's online for cities and developers and consultants to use to basically just kind of screen to see whether or not a development project would have a VMT impact according to a city's policy, or be able to be sort of screened out, not have an impact. In that tool, there are a number of different measures, including a lot of transportation demand management, TDM strategies that you could use to kind of check off and say, this development maybe starts off with a little bit higher VMT than the city's threshold, and then using these things, you can get it lower. Separately, VTA also has the TOC TDM policy. That's a lot of acronyms, but transit-oriented communities, transportation demand management policy, which Lindsay was talking about, which is specifically focused on what kinds of TDM measures would be required for development that VTA is, that is being led by VTA on VTA-owned land. And it has a number of measures in it that would help reduce basically automobile trips and therefore VMT as well. Most of the measures are the same, but there are slight differences because some things you could count maybe as a TDM measure for a policy, but wouldn't necessarily withstand CEQA scrutiny. Hopefully that's sufficient.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions from the task force? If there are none, I'd like to open this up to public comments. There are no members of the public in chamber, so I'm going to look online. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak. I have James with his hands up. So you should be able to unmute yourself. Please go ahead.
Yep. Regarding the BART development option 1 and option 2, my concern is that the area will be severely underparked for BART ridership. My main concern is that if you have shared parking, even though you calculated half a parking stall per unit, my concern is that the residential development, if you have, 2 people in a unit, they may just look at it as, look, I just got 2 cars per unit and I could flow over into the BART parking, which then would still parking away from future or BART ridership for people who are using it for employment. And so because of SB 79 increasing the overall density within the half-mile radius, and developer and the city cannot force developers for a minimum parking requirement, I personally, everyone has an opinion, right? Um, my personal opinion is that there should be dedicated parking structure on the BART land specifically to deal with ridership. And there's nothing worse than having a major transit hub connecting not only but BART, but the Caltrain, and people, are trying to park their car and there's no parking spaces because the residential units have a land grab or grab for their parking spaces, and there's nowhere to go, and the whole thing just implodes, and no one wants to be in this area because it's just severely underparked. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I think we can move on. Thank you for the presentation and coming in tonight. That was
Welcome.
super interesting. So it was cool.
Thank you. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Ugo.
Thank you, Ugo. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks for having us.
Can I ask a question back about SB 79? Would this have any impact on the current development proposal, the Bixby development project, which is right on El Camino and Ocolte? Or is that already that's kind of
We'll have to check if there's provisions like for pipeline projects. There typically are, but I didn't specifically check.
That's been a development that I think that there's a lot of concern about it maybe being underdeveloped.
Certainly lower density than what is prescribed in the SB 79. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Is the Bixby project entitled and approved?
I think we're actually a staff report on our agenda.
I have one update for all of you. If you recall, we received a grant from VTA also from the Transit Oriented Communities grant program for a form-based code, creating a form-based code for the station area. That grant is now finally executed, and we can move on to the next step, which would be putting out an RFP to hire a consultant for that body of work. That's all I have.
Yay.
Yay, yes.
Cheering for it. Thank you. Very much looking forward to this. Cool. Now we have any other questions, comments from the members? I think we're actually at the end of the agenda. Yeah,
One more.
go for it.
question. I guess with any project that is in planning or already underway in the planning phases, do they just continue down the path, or does SB 79 cause them to have to completely shift what they were doing to comply with the new law?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning about pipeline projects. So typically these laws have provisions for pipeline projects, like if they were in process.
Applied for, like application submitted.
Mhm. But I'll have to double check that.
We are at adjournment. So I did see at least on my script, we're saying the next meeting is going to be December 18th. Like, are we having that meeting or are we going to not have that?
No, I think we are probably going to cancel that meeting. We don't have any topics right now. And then the study sessions for council is right on the 16th, so it's not a lot of turnaround time in between.
Awesome. So we're adjourned. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Everybody seconds. Those who are in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose, abstain, unanimous, and we're done. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff. Thank you, VTA, for coming through.
Is this a record?
It could be for having a meaty topic too, so it's good.